Welcome to r/Maliciouscompliance, where employers are shocked that employees won't work overtime for free. Our first post is from Technos. Years ago, one of my employer's clients decided to set up a new office in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I got chosen to spend 3 weeks there getting the new space set up. Also chosen for the job was a guy from another division Chicago office, Dave. I'd never worked with Dave before, but from the start, I didn't like him much. He was never less than 15 minutes late. He lumbered like a zombie, and I caught him dozing off more than a few times during the first week on site. Still, he was the closest thing I had to a friend in Fort Wayne, so I invited him out to a bar on Friday for all the company-funded booze we could drink. "I wish," he says. "I'm going home and passing out until Monday. The commute has been killing me." Wait, what? It seems Dave's boss had been a dick, and instead of paying for a plane ticket, hotel, and rental car like my boss had, he'd instructed Dave to drive from Chicago, almost 3 hours away. I said, "Dude, that is like totally no bueno. 6 hours a day just driving? Yeah, it sucks." Still, it'll be killer money. That puts you at what, like 70 hours this week? Jeez. Make sure you put in for your gas and tolls quick though. The last time I had to get reimbursed for expenses, it took him over a month. I could see what little light Dave's eyes held fade. They're not paying for any of that. Hearing that, I put in a call to my boss, who was as puzzled as I was. If he'd worked for our division, he'd be paid for his drive time and expenses at least, and we were both pretty sure it was corporate edict and not something individual divisions could choose not to obey. Unfortunately, neither I nor my boss had any say in the matter, and neither of us were familiar with Illinois or Indiana labor law, so all we could do was advise Dave to save his receipts for the IRS and complain to HR. On Monday, Dave was late again. After an hour, I was worried and called his cell phone. "I just passed Portage, making pretty good time all things considered. I should be there in about 2 hours. Dave sounded perfectly happy about it, so I figured he'd been required to stop into his office before heading out for some reason. "Okay, Dave, I'll see you then." When Dave arrived a little after 11, the first thing he did was take a 15-minute break. Long drive, I understood. There was still most of the day ahead of us, and after the break, Dave finally got down to business booting up his computer. He had barely logged in when he stood up and announced he was taking his lunch. Okay, something was going on, but I hadn't the foggiest idea what. After lunch, Dave finally got around to some work, putting in a good 20 minutes reading email before stopping by to see me. "I'm gonna take my 15-minute break now, then I'm heading home." What? Dave grinning like a nut. "Don't worry, I spoke to HR over the weekend." I didn't see Dave on Tuesday. His cell phone was going unanswered, and neither my boss or I had any luck finding out why. We didn't try hard. Not our zoo and not our monkey, after all. Ditto for Wednesday, but whatever. He's probably just sick. And then on Thursday, I see Dave, before work, at the hotel breakfast buffet. "Dave, I was getting worried when you were a no-show for the last 2 days." Dave laughed a little, and after we'd piled our plates with bad scrambled eggs and burned sausage, he told me a story. On Monday, the client had noticed him coming in late, doing no work, and leaving early, and called our company to complain. Dave, in turn, was called into a disciplinary meeting with his boss and local HR, who were prepared to terminate him for putting in for 32 hours of unearned overtime the previous week and not working at all the day before. Dave said they were serious too. One of the guys from building security interrupted the meeting to deliver a box containing the personal effects from his desk. Dave had an ace though. Well, 3 aces. 1. An email from his boss instructing him to drive to Fort Wayne every day at his own expense as a change in work location. 2. An email from corporate HR telling him that while he wasn't required to work overtime, he was required to report any overtime worked, including driving to or from a client. And 3. A page from his division's employee manual, which covered paid breaks off-site. He then informed them that he was not working any more overtime, and after driving 3 hours in, 1.5 hours of breaks, and 3 hours home, it left him with just a half an hour a day to do actual work. Less, actually, if the traffic was bad. Oh, and that corporate HR was willing to stand behind him on it. He'd just spoken to them before the meeting. It took them about 3 seconds to realize they were screwed, and well, here I am, back in action. And since everything was booked last minute, I'm in a suite with a jacuzzi and my rental is a dang Cadillac. So out of curiosity, I looked it up, and the reason why HR backed Dave was because the company was in gross violation of federal labor laws. So if they had actually fired them, he would have had grounds to sue their pants off. I'm kinda sad they didn't fire him, to be honest with you. Our next post is from Fishhole. For context, my family and I recently moved into a rental house while our new house is being built. The rental is in the back of a gated community on a mostly undeveloped street. Yesterday, I received a letter from the Homeowners Association informing me that I'm not in compliance of the strictly enforced by towing restriction, stating that vehicles may not be parked on the street overnight. In the letter was a picture of my project car, an old BMW, parked beside our house on the street. I decided to look up the HOA's restrictions, which I haven't seen before since I'm a renter, and discovered I'm living in HOA heck. The street parking rule is just the beginning of a long list of restrictions, including one warranting a hefty fine for leaving the garage door open when not in use. This came as a huge surprise, since several of my neighbors have parked their cars in the street without problem since I've lived here, so I assumed it was okay. I can only assume that they've singled me out because my car is 30 years old. However, in my defense, it's very presentable and by no means junky. Being singled out made me incredibly frustrated to the point where I started doing legal research. It turns out my HOA has every right to tow my project car since it's parked on a private street in the neighborhood. The good news for me is that the street just outside of the neighborhood is public, and it's 100% legal to park on it for any amount of time. Unfortunately for the HOA, the closest section of public street to my rental house is right in front of their nice gated entrance. Ironically, my old BMW has now become part of their image, and there's nothing they can do about it until I move out in a few months. I imagine that somewhere out there must be good HOAs, but the more I read Reddit, the more I think that 99% of HOAs exist just so that the owners of HOAs can find people and line their own pockets. Our next post is from Alcifer1. So this is something that isn't all that uncommon in the service industry, but I thought I would share. Working as a bartender for a hotel that I enjoyed being part of. I'd always had a huge interest in making cocktails, so when I scored this job, I was over the moon. On top of that, it had a very good rate of pay and said that although they wouldn't pay overtime rates, they would pay overtime hours worked. This isn't bad at all for full-time in the service industry, as normally you're paid a salary and then massively overworked without any extra money for the insane hours worked. So enter new general manager and a business consultant. They've been recruited to try to save the restaurant and bar some money as it's making no profit whatsoever. Now, there is an obvious reason as to why it makes no money in the restaurant. The bar made 3 times the profit expected, and that is as follows. First, employing a team of 50 people per day, every day, is a huge drain on your income when your income does not compensate. Second, being top-heavy in managers with high salaries is beyond stupid. Third, employing 3 incompetent people to do one competent person's job is the equivalent of shooting yourself in the foot. So the bar operates on a team of 12 people during the week, whereas the restaurant operates on a team of 30 per day. We averaged a maximum of 3 bartenders and 1 barback working a busy shift and maybe 2 bartenders on a quiet shift. The bar is open until 1 a.m. every day and opens at 6 a.m., so it has long opening hours. Staff start and finish times are staggered to give the most effective use of staff hours when needed. The manager and consultant decide that they need to make cuts on all overtime hours. Sensible decision. But they decide to start making cuts in all the wrong places. Bartenders first. A meeting is called and all bartenders attend. It's explained to us that we will be receiving less overtime hours, so expect to be put on less shifts. More time at home. This is a win-win so far. What they neglected to tell us is that they would be pulling people from the busiest shifts, as these had the latest close times and often accrued the most overtime hours. So we end up short-staffed, being hit with complaints from slow service, and the staff start to get annoyed and look for work elsewhere. We ended up increasing our overtime hours as we had to work later than expected because we had less staff than needed to do a quick close down. 2 months later, and the remaining staff start muttering about their pay being much lower than usual. So we club together and start working out how much we've lost and how much we are being paid. It turns out that no one has been paid for a single hour over their contracted minimum. Now, to some people, this may not be much, but for us, it's anything between 40 and 80 hours a month extra. I spoke to the new manager in a meeting in which consultant declared he had to attend. The conversation went as follows. I say, it's come to my attention and the attention of many of the staff that we are no longer being paid for the hours that we work. Is there an error in payroll or is something else going on? Pay slips don't reflect what we are working and our hours accumulated have been changed to salary. The manager says, well, we have had to cut costs like we said several weeks ago. As a result, you aren't getting as much overtime, so your pay has dropped. Now, I'm a stickler for counting my hours worked. I take photos or film when I clock in and out every day. I then enter those times into a spreadsheet that automatically calculates normally hourly wage, deducts time taken for a break, and then adds additional overtime. This operates on a monthly basis and pumps out a figure which should reflect my monthly wage. 99.9% of the time, it was correct. The only times it wasn't was where the odd 15 minutes was missed off by payroll, but I didn't really care much about that. I pull out my laptop, hook it up to a projector, and go through each cell and explain how it works, much to the amazement of both manager and consultant. I then pull out my last 2 months of hours worked, compare them to my new pay slips, and have a slideshow running on the other half of the screen with pictures of my documented clock in and out times. With this piled against them, they decide to try and sweep it under the proverbial rug. Their idea is that if they just ignore it, I'll drop it and find work elsewhere like the others. However, after 2 further weeks of no response, my team and I make an ironclad deal between ourselves. If we aren't getting paid more than our minimum hours, then we won't work a single minute more. Roll on to a busy weekend immediately after payday. No one has been paid their extra hours, so the plan goes into effect. We all monitor the time and one by one start immediately dropping what we are doing, apologizing to the customers, and leave. It takes an hour before the GM figures out what is happening, at which point there are 2 people working a crazy busy bar. I'm approached by the manager. Where are the others? Why have they left? What's going on? Well, we don't get paid to work more than our minimum, so why should we bother continuing on past our paid hours? The others have gone home because they know they won't be paid for anything past that time. That's ridiculous. You can't just walk out and leave the place like this. Actually, I think you will find that we can and will. Now, the bar was busy. Having only myself and one other on it at this point meant we were losing money through lack of service, slow service, and through apologizing for bad service in general. This very quickly started piling up into the thousands. I think you should be aware that my shift ends in the next 15 minutes and the other bartender will be leaving in the next 30 minutes. This was at 8:30 p.m. on a Friday night. For some reason, the manager just ignored me and scurried off back into the restaurant. 15 minutes later, I left. 15 minutes after that, my colleague left. Minutes after that, the entire bar effectively went under. We all met in another venue with phones turned off, enjoying a drink and laughing about what had happened. We were pulled into a meeting with HR and management the following week to discuss our behavior. I explained the situation and told them that unless we were paid our overtime for the past 2 months and every month following, it would happen every weekend and that there was literally nothing they could do about it. Now, this is completely legal. If you aren't being paid, you don't have to work. They threatened to immediately dismiss the entire team if we didn't change our attitudes. We promptly folded our arms in defiance as one of the team calmly but firmly said, "Do it. Have fun running the bar with no staff." We were all told to leave the premises there and then. In the following months, we all learned that the place had never recovered as we had sent out messages on a local bartenders group stating that whoever worked there would not be treated properly and would not receive the correct pay. It switched from a high-end cocktail bar down to a standard pub-style bar and then finally closed altogether for renovations. The hotel was eventually taken over by a global company and underwent extensive renovations. We all found jobs fairly quickly after leaving, but never saw our 2 months unpaid overtime, sadly. That is the single dumbest ultimatum I have ever heard. You can either work and not get paid, or you can go home and not get paid. Choose wisely. I guess I'll go home and not get paid. Wait, what? That was r/Maliciouscompliance, and if you have any malicious compliance stories of your own, I want to hear from you down in the comments.